Hey, what's up, what it guys? Hey, welcome back to another video. This is going to be an update and kind of breakdown of the gear that I'm using for PvP specifically as Moonkin. I'm going to go over briefly over my spec. This is a spec that you are able to both raid and PvP pretty effectively with. And yeah, so let's just get right into it. I'll go over the spec here first. Down in the bottom portions of the balance tree are pretty straightforward. Only thing really worth mentioning is we have 5 points in Improved Wrath, 1 point in Nature's Grasp, and 1 point in Improved Nature's Grasp. The rest of everything down below the first row is pretty cookie cutter, with the exception of we obviously do not have Improved Thorns, which if you don't have a Druid in your raid with Improved Thorns, you might have to take this, which will mess up some of these points, but I don't have that issue as we have Resto Druid. So 5 points in Wrath is really helpful because Wrath is actually probably your most used spell alongside Moonfire, I would say, for just consistency. And then Nature's Grasp with 1 point and Improved here is a 50% chance to get a root, which is actually really helpful. This one extra point is pretty significant against like warriors and rogues and stuff like that. No points in Feral. And then down in the Resto tree, we have 5 points in Fur because, again, I don't need Improved Mark of the Wild. We have another Druid that has that. This allows me to shift into Bear form and instant bash. Not to mention if you shift into bear form in frenzied regen right away, it helps because you have that extra 10 rage off the bat there. Improved healing touch is definitely the go-to here in my opinion. This allows you to heal really efficiently in both PvE and PvP, topping yourself off or teammates off before or after a fight or whatever. Healing touch is kind of your go-to most efficient spell so that you're not having to drink too much in these battlegrounds. And then reflection, and then I also have 1 point here in insect swarm. So you'll see I'll post some clips here at the end of the video kind of this setup in action, but insect swarm I have macroed to a cancel form macro, so I shift out of forms and then cast insect swarm. Since you can't cast it in Moonkin form, it's actually a good macro and beneficial all the time, because if you were going to cast it no matter what, you can't be in Moonkin form and you can't be in any of your feral forms. So I basically am using this sometimes, not all the time, sometimes, but if I'm having to heal in situations, or if I'm opening up in cat form or trying to get a bash in bear form, that first global I'm using when I'm shifting out of that form and creating distance to land a root or kite or whatever I'm doing, I'm using that cancel form into insect swarm. So I'm actually getting a lot of value out of this in those situations. Again, it's not all the time, but it's worth that 1 point in my opinion. So let's go on to the gear real quick. Now, the most basic part of this setup is we're rocking 5 pieces of the tier 1. So I'm using the helm, the shoulders, the bracers, the legs, and the boots. Now, the legs, boots, and shoulders all have shadow resist, which is really helpful. You get your 5-piece bonus with that extra 2% crit, which is really good just always. The legs also have 1% crit, which is really good. And the boots, even though they don't have any like crit or anything like that, they do have a lot of good stats. Same with the shoulders, some MP5, not a ton of plus healing. You're getting most of your value in just the raw stats themselves. So that's what we're rocking as far as like the majority of our armor pieces. Now on the neck, I'm rocking Star of Mystaria. We do have Orb of the Dark Moon, but this build I'm running, I'm actually at hit cap in PvP via Star of Mystaria, the Banthox Sash, and we got the Band of Forest Concentration out of BWL. So that's 3% hit, which is PvP hit cap. You can still get resisted having 3%, but it's with specific races. Like I believe Night Elves have like a little bit of like increased nature resist or something like that. I might be wrong on that. But arcane, some people will have weird amounts of arcane resist because of different rings or gear and stuff like that they have. So there's certain resistances if people have a certain amount of, you can still resist, but baseline, assuming people don't have a significant amount of resist or some kind of weird ratio that would mess with your spell schools, then this is your actual hit cap. Making sure that you land all your fairy fires, entangling roots, things like that are really, really important. Not to mention casting a starfire into a moonfire and having them both resist is like the worst feeling ever. It happens all the time in raiding. And so you want to try and avoid that in PvP if you can, because that's definitely life or death type occurrences there. Alternatives, if you don't have these pieces, I would say Orb of the Dark Moon is a great pickup. It's pretty easy to get via the Dark Moon Fair. It's 360 thorium widgets. For me, was the cheapest way of getting it. So if you can't get a good neck piece, that's another good alternative. On the belt, I have Mana Igniting Cord. This is ideally what I would use if I can get 1% hit somewhere else in my gear, but for the time being, I don't have any other options. And then Band of Force Concentration is going to be harder for you guys to pick up because it is relatively rare and really sought after. But once ZG comes out, there are a couple rings in there that will give you some hit and some other pieces as well. There's another neck piece, a cloak, an offhand, a staff with 2% hit. So there's going to be more options once ZG comes out. So just be aware of that. I'm going to post a ZG gearing guide here in the future. But yeah, 3% hit is the biggest priority in my opinion. On to the cloak, we got Saffron Drape. This is a really good cloak in general, good amount of stats on it. You got some resistances on it as well as some damage. It's just overall really good. If you can't get your hands on this as it's off of Onyxia and kind of a contested item, you can use the PvP cloak, is really good. It's got high armor, high stamina. That's like the sergeant's cloak or whatever it is. Pretty easy to get, pretty inexpensive. So if you don't have a good offensive cloak here with a good amount of stats on it, I would suggest that because you get a lot of defensive value out of that one piece and it's really easy to acquire. On to the chest piece, we got Robe of Volatile Power with 4 to stats on it. Now, this is going to be a hard piece kind of to pick up, I think, for most of you guys. I know a lot of druids out there do have this because I've looked on logs and a ton of people have this. But this is basically going to be our BIS chest piece for a huge portion of the game until we can get Bloodvine for PvE specific situations. But when it comes to world content, PvP, things where you don't need extra hit, this is going to actually outperform. And with this build and in combination with the tier 1, we have a lot of extra crit. As you can see in Moonkin form, all I have is my shitty unimproved Mark of the Wild. We're at 16% chance to crit. So this combines really well with this setup that we're using with all the tier 1 pieces. Bracers are tier 1 like I talked about. On to the gloves. Now the taut Dragonhide gloves also drop out of BWL. The benefit with this piece is that there should not be anyone else that really wants these. Most druids, even if they're regrowth spec where they're trying to stack crit, are going to want the tier gear because of the set bonuses, just the bonus healing and all of that. So this should be an uncontested item and it's amazing for us for PvP. You have 20 int, 20 stamina on your glove slot, which is a lot of stats. Then you have that 1% crit, and the MP5 is nothing to scoff at either because that's helping a lot with the longevity of these fights. Battlegrounds can last 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes, and you're getting MP5 the entirety of that time that you're not at full mana. So even though it's not giving you throughput, it is helping reduce the downtime overall, the overall BG with drinking and things like that. So not trying to stack MP5, but it's definitely a useful stat if you have it on a few pieces. We already talked about Banthox Sash, legs and boots we already talked about. We already talked about our first ring. The second ring, you got a few options here. Some of these are easier to acquire than others. I've been rocking the Band of Sulfuras. I think this is going to be kind of my go-to. 23 int is just a lot of stats. You also have the stam, you also have the spirit, but increasing your mana pool by whatever that ends up being, around 300-ish, 350 or whatever that is, compared to something like Advisor's Ring that has 0 intellect on it, is really noticeable in my opinion as far as like the longevity in fights, like you're going to contest Blacksmith or things like that. Having that extra mana is really beneficial. Not to mention the stamina on this is also nice, and the spirit helping increase the potency of our innervate and just overall regen. So this has been the piece that I feel like I've enjoyed the play style the most. But like I mentioned, you can have Advisor's Ring, which this is honored with War Song. So that's also pretty easy to get if you don't have a good second ring. This is really good for PvE. This Advisor's Ring and the Band of Force Concentration are the 2 rings that I'm going to be using. This is your highest 2 DPS rings as far as like your actual output, your damage output. But when it comes to PvP, you're itemizing a little bit different, right? So Band of Sulfuras has been my go-to. This is a good second option. Another option that's a good one is Dragon Slayer Signet. This gives us a little bit more crit than Band of Sulfuras does, but it gives us about 150 or so less mana. And as you can tell, Band of Sulfuras has a little more stamina, a little more spirit, and this has fire resistance, but that's not that big of an importance in PvP in my opinion. So anyway, those are kind of the options that you have here. I just have this because of healing gear in my bags. Now onto the trinkets. Trinkets, as any of you guys that PvP a lot know, you swap around a lot. Toep is what I'm using almost all the time in conjunction with either PvP trinket or I'll throw on Briarwood Reed. If I'm going to try and contest a base and I know there's a Warlock, you know, we throw on a Reflector. You got all kinds of trinket options, but obviously max DPS would be Reed with Talisman, but most of the time I use Talisman and Insignia the Horde as my like kind of default cookie cutter setup, and then we kind of swap trinkets accordingly. Now onto the weapons, which is going to be the anticlimactic part of this video. We still have Time Worn Mace. So I haven't gotten lucky enough to get a good weapon yet, which is why I'm farming Arathi Basin. My intention with this build and my PvP setup is to get the staff from Arathi Basin Exalted. The staff has 95 armor. We can pull it up. 95 armor, it's like 40 some odd. Oh, perfect, I already have it open. 95 armor, you have a good amount of stats, 2% crit, and 41 bonus damage. Now, the Mind Fang with an offhand from AV actually yields you higher damage output. However, Ironbark Staff has more armor, which scales into Moonkin form, and it has more overall stats regarding Stam and Int, and it has an extra % chance to crit. So with this setup, we're at 16% chance to crit. That's going to have more intellect than the setup I'm currently running, so we'll be above 18% crit alone just with that change by itself. You could, if you're trying to go kind of a more unorthodox utility type setup, you could also enchant this with 22 intellect instead of spell damage. If you're doing a little more off healing maybe, or you want to really maximize the size of your mana pool, stuff like that. So there's some options with this, which we might play with because I think I am going to get a better DPS weapon via PvE some point here in the near future. So we'll see, but both of these are very, very good. If you have good offhands, you can use either of these. It's kind of preference, and especially with ZG coming out, there's that offhand with 1% hit on it. You might also want to rock the dagger, kind of up to you there. But that's all the stuff that we're running right now as far as our gear. I wanted to get this out to you guys because I've enjoyed this playstyle with this setup a lot. I feel really strong in most matchups rocking this gear and this talent setup. So let's go ahead and show you guys some clips. You guys can see some of the PvP that we've been doing. Feel free, you guys, to come and hang out with me on stream. I'm streaming a good amount as of late with all this quarantine stuff going on, and I'm going to be streaming some PvP here coming real soon. If you have questions, like always, ask them down in the comments. I do my best to get to every comment that I can and answer any of your guys' questions. And if you can hop on the stream, that's an easier way for me to kind of have a free form conversation and like elaborate on stuff that I might not have gone into depth too much in this video. So with that being said, thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.